morning. You're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Mubarakah Ibrahim, and this is Mornings with Mubarakah, where we talk about national issues from a local level through a lens of diversity. And it is a beautiful Wednesday morning, and you know that because this is your Wednesday morning voice. I'm streaming live from the Beaver Hills section of New Haven, Connecticut. You can also catch us live on 103.5 FM on your radio dial, TuneIn Radio, Facebook, Stream Me, and any place else where you are connected to New Haven Independent or WNHHLP. I want to welcome my guests to the show. We have with us two phenomenal Black men. Then we're going to talk about Black men, joy, and thriving. I am excited to have this show because I think that it is going to be a much needed voice and perspective. We are constantly inundated with all of the threat of Black men, how they are brutalized, how Black men are dying by the hands of police and racism and injustice. It is a constant stream, particularly in the last 30 days. I mean, we always heard it, but now it's like consistent. And when we talk about these particular topics and all the negativity around it, it begs a question of, we have Black men who are surviving and even thriving in America. So how do they do that? How do they have the resilience to actually be under threat all the time and still go to work every day, go to school every day, go home and be fathers and brothers and sons and husbands? What is it that they're doing that's helping with that resilience? And my question as a Black woman is, how can we support them? So I would like to welcome our two guests to the show. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. So today we have Malcolm Welfare, who is a certified school librarian and media specialist of King Robinson IT STEM School in New Haven, Connecticut, and Qasim Rashad, who has been the Emir of the United Muslim Masjid in Philadelphia for almost 10 years, and he serves as the vice president of the Muslim Wellness Foundation, an organization committed to the healing, well-being, stigma reduction, and mental health advocacy. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me this morning.
You're welcome. Good morning, community. Thank you for having me.
So one of the, I guess the first question that I will put at a table, and of course the question is for both of you gentlemen to ask is, at what point in your life did you understand the threat at being a Black man in America? Like, is that something that you understand as a young boy, or does it just come to your understanding as you experience negative interactions in your life?
Who's first?
Either one of you.
All right, well, I'll take a stab at it since I'm the elder on the show. I'm 58 years old. I'll be 59 in November. And so I go back to the era of Police Commissioner Frank Rizzo, who many of you know is probably one of the most racist, brutal police commissioners in the North, next to Bull Connor. That he was an iconic figure for white fascist racism in Philadelphia. And so the police at that time, as they still are to this day, a predominantly white organization with races within the police community. And so we were raised under that type of regime to be cognizant and fearful of police. So that did have an impact on our mental health. It had an impact on how we interrelated within the community and how we moved about within our small infrastructure of society.
And at what age did you realize, like, is this just something that you just, ever since you grew up in Philadelphia? Did you grow up in Philadelphia? And
Yes.
It was just normal?
I think there are a lot of memes, that are going around, something to the effect, they show little black boys that said, when did my smile become to mean something threatening to you? And so at that age, around entering high school, is when we started being harassed by police. If someone was on the corner walking down the street, they obviously wouldn't stop the little ones, they would stop the most vulnerable ones, which were the teenage boys or the young men. And so we began being harassed very early, around the age of 12, 13, 14. There's a very famous photograph of black men stripped down to their underwear on Columbia Avenue in what is now, North Philadelphia, being strip searched, and Frank Rizzo standing outside with a bullet. Well, that was fairly predictable. I wouldn't say routine, but not shocking. And that picture was not an isolated situation.
Mm-hmm. And so, Malcolm, did you grow up here in New Haven?
I did. I grew up here in New Haven. And as far as my experience with being aware of my racialized experience, it was pretty early. I would say my preschool experiences were pretty positive. And I really started to experience race and racialized experiences once I started to hit grade school level. And, it was interactions with teachers, interactions with classmates. And in particular, there was one teacher who really taught us about Black history and Black culture through music. As my music teacher. And she was a Quaker. And so we would always learn Negro spirituals and learn medleys, and we would learn the history behind those things. And then, of course, at home, my mother and father would always supply me with understanding and knowledge of history. So I was very aware of what was going on in terms of why I would receive some of the energies or some of the responses or some of the outright statements that I would get as a young man. And I really thank my parents for helping me with understanding and giving me that base knowledge to help me understand what was going on, why it was happening, and how I could, from my own mind, shift or do different things to kind of deal with what was being given or dealt toward me.
And so that actually is a great segue into my next question. At what point do you personally realize kind of like it's affecting you on an individual level in your mental health, in your physical health? Like, is there anything that you say, okay, this is really having a direct effect on me? At what point do you feel that?
For me, it was very young when I was, I could say the first racial explosion that I had was when I was in second grade, and we were working on, I think, gingerbread houses. And I had something, or I asked for something, and one of my classmates responded, "Oh, here you go, you little Black boy." And I just, something inside me just broke, and I didn't know what it was or what happened. And, I ended up hitting the classmate. And, the teacher asked what happened, and she was also a white woman. And as soon as I told her what happened, and she saw how upset I was, and I was crying, and she looked at the little girl, and she was like, "You were wrong." And, we're going to call your parents and let them know what happened, but you were wrong. And so, I thought I was going to get in trouble, and I thought I was going to get punished. But, I guess, the teacher, understanding who my parents were, she assessed the situation and really looked at, what was going on, and my ability to articulate what I was feeling, and based on what she had said to me, I was able to let the teacher know what happened. But yeah, it was very early. I was 6 years old, second grade, 6 years old. And yeah, an explosive experience that, and I still feel that energy that she pushed toward me, and it came back. So.
And as you got older, how do you identify, what are some of the identifying factors that when you know that this is about to happen again, or I need to pull this back?
Oh, I mean, I've had a lot more experiences since then. And again, luckily I've had a lot more supporting knowledge to help me understand how to address, or how other people have addressed these things. So, you know, just as I've grown older, being in those experiences, I mean, that experience right there was emotional, like being a little kid and like thinking like, oh my, like feeling that feeling of needing to defend yourself in that way against something that somebody said, but then feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get in so much trouble, and then like just like pleading your case. You don't want to feel like that again. So as I've grown older, I've learned how to articulate myself. I've learned how to use knowledge and the things that I've learned from home and throughout my schooling and throughout my self-teaching, to diffuse racism.
So Qasim, you work with a lot of young people through one of the things in your bio is you oversee the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, as well as you work with young people in the Muslim Wellness Foundation. What are some of those identifying factors that Black men in particular have to be aware of so they don't explode, right? What are some of those things that you bring to light?
Well, first, we teach them that, or I try to inculcate them that, you know, to be proud of your Blackness, you know, to be a proud Black Muslim, to be a proud Black person, you know, and to feel comfortable in your identity, and that no one can take away anything from you that you don't want them to take from you. And so we build a foundation based upon faith and then identity. And the combination of the two reinforces that. And of course, if they're working within the construct of their masjid, their mosque, their church, whatever the case may be, or within their leadership or their parental circle, then they get that reinforcement. But teaching Black kids that it's okay to be Black, you know, is really more difficult than what the average person or what a white person might think, because it's second nature to a white person that they have privilege, that they have acceptance, and that they have a social passport. They can come and go as they please. Whereas, you know, our kids go into the mall, they get profiled, or they meet a teacher for the first time. And, you know, I can remember I went to grade school in Europe, and one of the first things that the teacher did in terms of discipline was pull my pants down in front of the class and paddle me with a yardstick. You know, and I was only about 7 or 8 years old at that time, but I never saw that happen to any of the white kids. So I learned early on that there was a different set of rules, you know, for them than there was for me. And I had to operate within that paradigm. But at the same time, you can't become a step and fetch it. You can't become conquered by the perception that these people have of you. And you have to learn to navigate within that structure. But at the same time, self-preservation is the key to survival.
Mm-hmm. So that brings actually us to the kind of point of the show. I wanted to give it some type of context in talking about what, I guess, for lack of better terms, the negative part of growing up Black in America, but really want to focus on the surviving and thriving part, particularly for Black men. Because we talk about this when I hear these conversations about self-care and about taking breaks and survival. I always hear it coming from a Black woman's perspective. And I don't hear often enough it coming from a Black man's perspective. I know when I hear my husband talk about how difficult it is for him to be worried about his family and his experiences of not just about himself, but all of his responsibilities, it brought to mind that it really is a different perspective what Black men are concerned about as opposed to Black women. We have intersection, but certainly there are things that are unique to being a Black man. So what are some of the ways in which you literally prevent yourself from going crazy, right? What are some of the self-care techniques that you incorporate into your daily life that can, help other people, help other Black men?
Well, I think claiming your body, claiming yourself, claiming your health and your wealth, that's one of the things that I've been on a journey for several years. As you know, I've experimented with veganism and ketosis and so on and so forth. But I always knew, and I started this journey maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that in order for me to be safe psychologically, I have to be safe physically. And my health was not in the best. And so I took control of my health. And recently, within the last year or so, I lost 50 pounds. I got all of my blood and all of that together. And, I'm in fairly decent shape for old dude, my age. But I couldn't dedicate myself to certain aspects of, say, social justice, social action, being committed to the community if I'm on my back, or if I don't have the best mental outlook because I don't have the best health introspective. I'm not in the best of health. So I make it a routine to, do some sort of time claiming for myself, where I'm out on a trail walking, or I'm exercising, or I'm working out with my son or something, where I dedicate at least an hour or maybe 2 of that just to my own self-preservation. And you come back to the field or to the fight, better fit, better able, better sound mind and body. And I found out that taking time out for myself, which a lot, like you say, your husband, he's the head of the household. He's not only concerned about his personal well-being, but the well-being of his sons, his daughter, his wife, his extended family, nieces, nephews, so on and so forth. We take all of that into consideration. And that's a huge weight on them. And you could see, I could 30 pounds, having difficulty tying my shoes. That can be depressing, at the very least, not knowing that you cannot perform in your peak performance. I see some of these young guys, they put out challenges. If you can't do 10 push-ups, you can't defend your wife, stuff like that.
That's interesting. That must be like on a guy's feed. I haven't seen that one, but I would love to see it.
That was a challenge.
Wow.
So you can see how they intersect, how your mental health and your physical health definitely play off of each other. And if you don't have one, it's going to be very difficult to achieve the other.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. And as a 33-year-old man, I try my best to stay in my best physical shape. And being very busy, I sit on various boards. That's also one of my ways of coping and making sure that I am feeling some type of ownership over my communities, making sure that I give back and that I contribute. So that way, if there are, if there's any opinion about the community that needs to be had, in some way, shape, or form, either my work will inform it or maybe my voice will inform it directly, but just making sure that I have an impact, making sure that I'm having an impact on the community around me. So that way everyone can live a better life. But also besides that, I feel like education and knowledge is one of the safe places that I find to rest my mind. Because I've been on this continuum of racism that hasn't stopped since birth. It's been very interesting, to go through high school and to find coping mechanisms. I went to a Catholic high school, Notre Dame High School, West Haven, and it was a very interesting cultural shift. But I'm grateful for that experience because I got a chance to understand some of the mental mechanisms and the why behind some of the racisms from an academic and a pedagogical perspective. So when we look at the canonization of the Bible and we look at the culture that created, and we look at the cultural shift of that time from the Black Jews of the time and the original practitioners And then to the shift of this new culture being driven by the Romans, being driven by this money-powered culture, you start to understand a little bit more as to the narrative that's been set up over the last few hundred years. And so for me, knowledge and understanding the overarching schema of what's going on and why it's happening has been a very it's not a good place, but it gives me deeper insight and understanding as to what I'm experiencing, why I'm experiencing it, and how some of those mechanisms can be broken down. Outside of that, just practicing health is wealth, and then reversing that, wealth is health. Working on my financial health and my financial fitness, as I call it, making sure that I have ownership in different companies that make decisions in the landscape of what's going on in our country and how we're treated, because the economic side is very closely linked to the political and the policing side of things. So understanding that, having an understanding or a level of understanding for economics and then having a level of input within economics has also given me some mental space and some mental ability to kind of maneuver and digest some of the ugliness that I'm seeing and experiencing in this current phase of racism in America.
And let me ask you, how do you, when you are experiencing you're not in a good mental space, how do you communicate that to your wife or your kids, or do you kind of like just suck it up? Like how do you balance those two things of feeling the pressure of having the responsibilities, the larger extended responsibilities that you have as men, but then at the same time being present within your family? Is there a technique or a way to balance that?
Well, sometimes you can't share everything, but finding outlets, finding other ways, I'm in a fraternity, so reaching out to my fraternity brothers has been a great outlet to kind of just talk about, what are we going to do as men? And how are we going to respond? What should our response be? And just having those conversations has really been a relief. Or just talking about the good old times that we used to have outside of the pressures of racism, and just creating that environment for yourself and others to share that communal space of brotherhood, when you can't share with your partner or your child what's going on. That's for me, has always been a great outlet. I've been in the frat for going on 12 years, coming up in next spring. So,
what frat is that?
Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Rooster Bros.
Okay.
Man, that's crazy.
Got a little connection there.
Yes, that's what's up.
So, Qasim, can you give us your perspective on that same question? Like, how do you, when you are in that space, how do you deal with balancing your mental health with also being present within your family?
Well, I think someone said that prayer is the sword of the believer. And, as a Muslim, we pray 5 times a day and in between and make dua, supererogatory prayers. And that's my time for reflection, to have that connect for what it is that I need and to be used in the best way that I can be used. I'm also very active in the fraternity. I've been in a little more than 12 years. I'm going on my 40th anniversary, get my pen. But I'm also the chairman for the Social Justice Committee for the 2nd District, which is, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and New York. So I'm active, in the communal sense. I'm active in the societal sense and in my immediate community as well. But prayer is what I rely on a lot. And nothing like praying with your mate, praying with your spouse. That is a reinforcement of every time you pray together of the marriage bond. And so if you are praying with someone, if you are praying with your family, then they know that you have this connection to God. And then that's a time for you to have that connection with them and to converse with them about what's going on. Because nowadays, you know, I guess years ago, the family used to get together for dinner. And then that was a time when you cut the television off and people could converse and talk about their day. But because we live in such a cosmopolitan lifestyle and we live in such a structured way, it doesn't often allow for that luxury that we get together for anything. But prayer requires us to get together whether we want to or not, whether it's 5 times a day or whether it's on Sundays or anything like that. I think spirituality and your connection to God is how you can use that time to reflect for yourself and to get away and get into that conversation with God and then watch his work on you once you've asked him for his mercies.
Mm-hmm. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. We're streaming live from the Beaver Hills section of New Haven, Connecticut, also on TuneIn Radio. We are talking about how Black men survive and even thrive in America in spite and despite of it all. We are talking to Qasim Rashid and Malcolm Welfare. And we want to know, how do Black men experience joy when it seems like everything around us is trying to crush their joy? You know, we have all of these sayings, Black girl joy and Black girl magic. And I'm like, what do Black men have? Right? So we got to create some more hashtags, y'all. We got to create hashtags for Black men.
Definitely.
So what are some of the ways in which you try to experience actual joy in your life? That is really the burning question.
So just like Qasim said, you know, prayer and going to church. I'm a Baptist by choice. I went to a Catholic high school, Jewish University, University of Hartford, where I played. And then I also, I came back to my upbringing and chose a church that I actually happened to be raised in. But I chose the church because they spoke on the cultural relevance of Black life as it pertained to the spirit and the word. So reflecting on not only the word, but how it applies to Black life and how you can use that to elevate yourself and strategize as a Black person in America, given the strife. And then drawing the parallels between that with the biblical. So, you know, I am a deacon in training at Christian Tabernacle Baptist Church and participate in the youth ministry, the young adults ministry. So, getting a chance to talk with new young adults and connecting with new young adults has been a way that I have found joy in the last about a year and a half. I've been participating with Chosen. And we meet people from all different kinds of churches, all different kinds of denominations, and they just come and talk and they share their perspectives and we pray together. And that has really been a source of joy because I'm helping to provide a service that can breach all different kinds of barriers, and to me that's transformative work. So that's what I really am enjoying in the recent.
And Qasim, how do you find joy?
Well, like young Malcolm said, you might move out to the suburbs and leave the city, but you got to come back to 2 things: get your heart in and to get your worship on. So I find comfort within that formal religious community. I'm a Muslim by choice. My mother's Baptist, raised us Baptist. I call myself an evolutionary Muslim. I evolved into Islam all of my mother's children and grandchildren are Muslim. And so, she had a greater problem with one year when I think it was Imam W.D. Muhammad said, let's support the Bushes because they are for family values. And she wanted to disown me for that, but she was like, you can be a Muslim, but you can never be a Republican. But I find that support within, faith, family, and fraternity, just like, and in that order, my allegiance, my first commitment is to God, and then family, and then my immediate circle of friends are men of Omega, because these are the guys that I went to school with, I grew up with, I pledged, and so on and so forth. And so that's how I find reinforcement. And Omega Psi Phi is doing wonderful things in terms of COVID-19, in terms of the racial injustice. A lot of them, Benjamin Crump and Lee Merritt, who are the leading attorneys in a lot of these cases, are Omega men. The interim police chief for the city of Atlanta is a member of Omega Psi Phi too. So that brings me a certain level and a degree of pride, and that I'm with the right group of people, and that kind of bolsters, my own mental health, if you will,
yes.
My own sense of pride.
So when you are, it sounds like community is a really big part of that resilience that you have to create for yourself. When you are among your community of men, is self-care a part of that conversation? So we know that people get together and, you guys are really active and you are service leaders, both of you, in giving back to community. But in terms of individual self-care, is that a conversation that men have? So I know I'm an outsider woman, but I'm curious when you have your secret circles.
Absolutely.
Do you talk about self-care?
We do. And it comes out in different ways. And it's not always just like, hey, did you go to the doctor? Mm-hmm. It comes out in maybe like, if we have a program around men's health and it's a specific function of men's health. And we start talking about that in certain chapters, focus in on those, and then they pull in other chapters that creates a larger conversation. So it does happen. And one of the things that I'm very proud of as a man, just in the last probably like 2 years, I think I know I am seeing a lot more self-reflection and a lot more of that self-reflection. How do I want to phrase this? I guess being less guarded, more apparent in the public. So a lot more of the healing has become normalized. And so like those conversations around mental health, those conversations around meditation, those conversations around proper technological usage, those conversations around financial health are becoming a lot more commonplace in my age bracket, and I'm loving it. And I think we need more, of course, but I'm glad that the trend is starting to uptrend.
Mm-hmm. What about in your circles, Qasim? Is talking about self-care becoming more common?
Yes, particularly within the organization Muslim Wellness Foundation and within masajid or mosques throughout the country, it's becoming more and more common. More and more Muslim mental health practitioners are giving their just desserts. They're being recognized, probably, which is the case in the church community, and that the pastor or the imam is the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. He is looked at as the end all be all. And often these religious leaders are trained religiously, but not in the sciences of mental health and physical health. Mm-hmm. But they take that burden on. And so now we're seeing that you need a certain level and a degree of expertise that you bring to this mental health thing, this space called mental health. And so now we see that churches are having and mosques are having these where they had these health retreats for Black men, but mental health is a strong component. And what I'm seeing in Malcolm's generation and what he's talking about is financial and wealth health. Is now you see a lot of young brothers who are interested in day trading, stocks, investments, real estates, flipping homes, and so on and so forth. And that's something that in my generation was not, an emphasis was not placed upon it. And it's all intersected and interrelated, because once something begins to slip and you see, say, an older brother, he may be stricken with diabetes or hypertension and things starts to build up, they can either go resistance or they can give in. And all too often we see Black men give in to their physical health, and then everything else starts to slide or shift within that paradigm of feeling defeated. My mental health is gone, my physical health is gone, my mental health is gone, my financial health is in jeopardy, and it just kind of become overwhelming. So you do have to concentrate on one thing at a time. I wouldn't recommend that you try to tackle everything in your life. I think the priority would be your mental health, because if you're thinking clearly and you're thinking straightly, then you can help yourself in other aspects of your life. But mental health is becoming very important in spiritual health and within the spiritual communities.
I would also say taking the time to look at yourself and really just take the time with yourself. A lot of times guys don't have a facial cleansing regimen, for example, or every week or every 2 weeks I go get my feet done, or those things are important. And sometimes people look at them and they think that it's about aesthetics.
That's definitely not my generation.
Hey, that's
but I'm with you because I do it, but it's something, you have to be kind of open-minded to the mani-pedi. I think I had my first mani-pedi like 2 years ago.
Yeah, it's pretty commonplace now. Especially, we post our pictures, it's whatever.
I was like Shanae on Martin with the buzz saw on the feet.
But it's not just about the aesthetics. It's also about, that part is true too. When you look good, you feel good. But it's also about taking the time to really know yourself, taking the time to really, when I comb my hair this way, it gets wavy. When I comb my hair this way, it gets straight. When those different.
Yeah, that's a real concern for me, Malcolm.
It's or it's the beard.
Okay, yeah. Good comeback.
Knowing those things about yourself are important as a man, and it helps you tap into that center, that quantum.
Gotta comb my face.
Yeah.
But it's really that kind of like knowing yourself on an intimate level.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, so I guess a couple more questions. One of the things that I often have conversation around is sort of like focusing on mental health or self-care is somehow opposing the work that we have to do. How do we get and encourage people to have self-care while we are doing the much needed work that needs to be done? So how does self-care intersect with the resistance, for lack of better terms?
I say get them when they're teenagers. I've had 2 teenage sons and 1 to come. And the minute a girl looks at them, they're in the shower every day. And you know the deal. They want to primp and be clean and so on and so forth. And it was never motivated out of self-care. It was motivated out of trying to make an impression. But that's a good place to start.
True. Absolutely true. I think any invested and true organizer and protester will understand that you have to have both sides. You have to have balance. You have to have a fight on all sides. So when you think about strategy and you think about how you approach racism or how you approach injustice with people of all varying learning levels and learning styles, you have to have all approaches. So when you look at Black fathers raising children, that's resistance to the narrative. When you look at Black men coming together and using their voice in order to collectively stand against something, or even just to spread friendship throughout their community, that is resistance against the narrative. So when we have all of those things combined, and we have the economic power, and we have the understanding of the self at the quantum level, and then the understanding of the self at the meta level, then we understand that everything is needed, and there's a whole totality that has to be mechanized in order for this problem to be tackled. Because there wasn't only one kind of slave master in the chattel slavery days. You had slave masters who were rich, slave masters who were poor, slave masters who of all different varying types. And so when you look at the complexities and the dimensions of the problem, you have to have the same response in terms of the answers and the solutions. So you have to have the complexities and the individualities speaking to the issue. And as long as we frame it and mechanize it as such, we will be able to always have the power of that intersectionality at our forefront as opposed to at our back. Mm-hmm. So it's important that we understand that our individuality is our strength when we use it as a collective. We can't be a collective of individuals. That won't work. Mm-hmm. But when we understand and we frame our individual fights and struggles as the different pivot points of the unified focus, then we'll be able to shift how we're responded to in terms of how we fight, because it's not one dimensional, and one dimension shouldn't be respected over the other. We should, as a collective, make everyone respect our collective fight for what it is.
And so really one of my last questions is, how can we as Black women support Black men, not just in a collective fight for justice, but on an individual level? What is the support that you think is the most essential to helping you be resilient and thrive as a Black man in America? And I know that I probably should have gave you that question ahead of time. I figured. So what kind of direct advice would you give us that would help? And it could be something that you're not receiving or you are receiving. So wives, don't take it personally. No one takes it personally. But what do you think those things are that I can do better as a Black woman to support both my husband, my sons, as well as Black men in general?
I think understanding that we're not fighting alone or as individual silos, that we are a unit. And that means understanding the struggle of your Black brother, understanding the strategy that your Black brother is trying to take or approach, and then taking that journey with your brother. So a lot of times in units or within groups, we see people who disagree based on gender lines or disagree based on strategy or approach, or the strategy isn't really understood, it's just followed. So Kasim talked about the finances and the stocks. So that's something that can be learned as a unit. That's something that is non-gendered, but if a lot of Black males are into it, and a sister would like to support, starting with learning or starting with throwing out terms or just creating general conversation around those points of strategy that were talked about today, whether it's prayer, whether it's family time, whether it's financial fitness, whether it's building community, or however you would like to do it. Just making sure that the strategy is understood from both sides, both the individual perspective and from a strategic perspective. So the strategy is kind of like general, but the individual is more so where you get into that intersectionality, those nuances of gender, how you may be able to say something passionately as a woman, but if I say it as a man, I'm viewed as an instant threat. And so our strategy together, it would be perfect because, you can play hard and I can play soft, or vice versa. However, it plays out for you as an individual wearing that gender role. But I think that's where we come together.
Qasim, how do you think Black women can better support Black men, both on a personal level and as a collective?
Well, as Malcolm said, through collective healing, commonality, support, and trust, being open-minded to different linear gender thinking. Don't be closed-minded. There are a lot of people out here who come from different perspectives that have commonality with you. Now, whether you're part of this movement, that movement, or whatever the movement may be, even the devil speaks the truth before God. And so we can't deny a person's truth because we don't agree with their lifestyle. And so understanding that, and when you're in a collective, having a common aim, a common goal from the small unit of the family, or the small unit of husband and wife. If you guys aren't on the same page, then you're going to have a lot of conflict, and you're going to be pulling in opposite directions. So when you start these journeys of self-care, whether it be mental, spiritual, financial, you have to have those things in common. You have to be in the collective, and you have to be on the same page. So Black women supporting Black men, but being open to the opportunity to support Black men, is what I think most people, particularly a Black man, wants from his mother, his sister, his wife, his companion. And know that it is not a monolith, that protesting is not the only tool or object that we have available to us, and that it's diversity. You're going to need people who can do things politically, who can do things economically, who can do things at the voting booth, who can do protesting, and so on and so forth. And we have to look at that as diversity within the collective, and that there's no one way. So when people say, well, we've marched for 100 years and it's gotten us nothing, that's not true. It's gotten us a lot. And so voting has gotten us a lot. Political aspirations have gotten us a lot. We are now getting on to the fore of common economics. And that may be one of the linchpin aspects of our communal disunity that we can bring together and say, look, if we're going to go out and we're going to invest in this, the stock market, real estate, so on and so forth, then we can accomplish some great things. And if we can do this as a unit, and we can do this as a people, and we can do this as a husband and a wife, as a father and a daughter, and so on and so forth, then we can be very successful. And so that's how Black women can support Black men, and that's how Black men can support Black women. I don't want to overshadow Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor, because there have been Black women who have been martyred as a part of this, I would say, pandemic of white police racism, and they have paid the ultimate price and sacrifice as well. So, we know typically in an intersection between a police officer and a Black person is usually a male, but they don't discriminate, as we have seen, between male or female. And so understanding our mutual pain, supporting one another, and that's all a person wants, is that support. But you want that transparency. You want this is an old term, ride or die. You want someone that when you say charge, you can run into the crowd and you don't have to look over your shoulder to see if they're there behind you, because you can feel them. And that's what we're looking for for Black women, and I'm pretty sure that that's what Black women are looking for in Black men.
Yeah. Can I just say one more thing? I think there's you just reminded me of this. My brother said, something that made me think about knowing the true of each other. So knowing the true Black man and knowing the true Black woman. So like the Black man is not what America makes it seem to be. And I think right now we're starting to see this, but there's a new there's a new realigning and a new knowledge of self that's happening between the two. And I think the unit is becoming stronger. But I think that needs to be done more intentionally. It needs to be focused on, because some of the perceptions that we have of each other kill the momentum that we have because our expectations are low. In education, expectations are everything.
Wow, it was a very enlightening conversation. We have about 2 more minutes left to the show. Do you have any particular thought that you'd like to leave us with? And how can people find or follow you online if they'd like to?
Yes, come follow me at Black Futurist, BLKFUTRIST, Black Futurist on Instagram. And I'll be able to give you all of the other pathways that I have. But I do have a stock group. We do talk group research. We do talk strategy. We do talk, overall cultural relevance of the market to Black life and the economics of of Black life. So it's called Rootstock, and I invite the entire community to come join us, come chat with us.
Wow. I'm in so many spaces. It's ridiculous. You'll probably find me under Qasim Rashad on Facebook, blithering about something to do with social justice. Right now, I'm undertaking a project, especially in light of the fact that all of these white police officers are saying they're resigning, or they're willing to resign, or that's where they're. And I say, what took you so long? So we're starting a project within Omega Sci-Fi where we want to launch a recruitment of cadets for Black police academies. But it's the whole system is wrought with systemic racism from the application process. In Philadelphia, you can't even apply for a police officer's job if you have bad credit, if you have overdue bills, utility bills with the city, if you have tickets, so on and so forth. Little things that they use to discern and discriminate Black candidates from the process. And so what we're trying to do is work with the police commissioner to bypass all of those hurdles and to get more Black police officers on the force. So you can find me on Facebook, like I said, saying pretty much.
Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate this conversation. I think that this is definitely going to be one that we want people to share, because I was definitely enlightened throughout this process. If you are just tuning in, then you have been listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. If you've missed any part of this show, then you can find all of our shows archived on both SoundCloud and iTunes. Just look for the New Haven Independent or WNHHLP. And I bid you this week, as I remind you every week, go about your week to be a voice and not an echo. Until next week.